Law&Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and since the jury instructions are continuing on, we are going to break in and bring you some coverage of a special story that has been covered on the Law&Crime Network website this week, but we have not yet had the opportunity to cover here on the network. And that is the story of James Dempsey. James Dempsey was a World War II veteran who was a patient at the Northeastern Atlanta Health and Rehabilitation Center. While there, he experienced some sort of an upset that ultimately led to his death. His family, the family of James Dempsey, filed a lawsuit against the facility. And during the course of that lawsuit, as is often happening in cases across the United States every day, depositions were taken. During one of these depositions, some facts came to light that were certainly upsetting and shocking. And we want to talk to you a little bit about those facts, what happened in that case, and explore some of the issues that come up from that case. We have with us on the phone as our guest today, Mark Eisenberg. He is a constitutional lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, but also has done some work with these types of cases involving nursing homes. Good morning, I guess good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon to you, Heather.
Mark, I want to just talk to you before we show the video. I want to talk to you a little bit about this process, because when you take depositions, in this case, the person who is being deposed that the audience will see in just a minute is Wanda Knuckles, and she was a nursing supervisor, and her deposition was videotaped. Talk to our audience a little bit about the procedure. Are all depositions videotaped, or is that a strategic decision made by the lawyers at trial during discovery?
Yeah, very few depositions are actually videotaped. Oftentimes we do that when we have evidence that's likely to be contrary to what the anticipated testimony is, or in the alternative, if we feel that placing a camera in the face of the deponent is likely to cause them to be more forthright and honest.
Right.
In many of the civil rights cases I've handled with police officers, I often put that camera right there in hopes of invoking more truthful testimony.
Yeah, and to your first point, when you think that there's something that might in fact negate what the deponent, what the witness is going to say, it's certainly effective and something you don't want to lose, to be able to have that moment and the facial expressions and the body language and all of those things on tape to show the jury. Isn't that really the hope when you do a videotape deposition?
Well, as you know from trying cases, there is a jury instruction that's widely used that instructs the jurors that they may consider, among things other than the oral testimony that they received during trial, is the body language and expressions, etc.,
right,
of the various witnesses. Obviously, in a deposition, if it's being recorded through videotape and a person offers expressions or body language that may be a tell or most telling on the particular subject, you want a jury to be able to see that rather than them having time to prepare themselves for trial with the benefit of counsel and working around those issues.
Right.
Oftentimes,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So oftentimes, you catch people at a deposition, and in this particular case, we know that there was a hidden camera in the room that the nurse probably didn't know about. So they used videotape deposition as a means to elicit testimony that they could subsequently impeach with, I won't call it sub rosa, but hidden video, if you will, that they had from the room at the time of these events.
And that's a perfect setup for the video itself, Mark. What I want to do now for the ladies and gentlemen at home is show them the videotape deposition, which has a video within the video, as Mark mentioned, there was a hidden camera video of James Dempsey's room, and show you this. It's about an 8-minute clip of that deposition, and then Mark and I are going to come back and discuss.
I got a call from the terrace. I just happened to be at the desk, and I picked it up. She said, "We got a code." I just said, "Be right there," hung up the phone, ran out the door, across the courtyard, through the east wing, and the elevator was there, and I went downstairs, and they told me she was in 326. So I'm sorry, not 326, well, 3-something. And I went down there and they had the door open. They was doing the code. I took over. I said, "You need to go call," so she could go call 911. And I started calling, and the other lady was back doing the rest with the bag.
All right. Tell me what you saw when you came into the room.
Lois was That's the nurse, was doing compressions, and the aide was doing the bagging.
And the nurse was doing what?
Chest compressions.
Chest compressions. From the time you came in, you took over doing chest compressions from Miss Loyce, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you continuously gave chest compressions until Miss Loyce came back?
Yes.
At which time you relieved the nurse's aide named Miss Mabel,
Yes.
and you guys continued giving CPR until the EMTs took over?
Yes.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that once you start CPR, you shouldn't stop. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why?
I mean, you're trying to save a person's life. Once you start it, unless a doctor says stop, you have to continue. That's always been the rule. I'm the queen of residents' rights.
All right. All right. Did you hear what he just said?
Yes.
Help me, can't breathe. Would you agree it appears as though he's gasping for air at this time?
It looks like it.
Well, you're a nurse. You know when someone's gasping for air, correct?
Yes.
All right. If you saw this when you walked in the room, would you agree that it appears as though he's gasping for air?
I would.
Is that an emergency situation, ma'am?
Yep. Yes.
And according to my notes, it was, the call light was initially hit at 4:34:35. All right. So I would like for you to assume for me that the call light was initiated at 4:34:35 and she walked into the room at 4:42:18. Is that an acceptable period of time for someone to answer a call light?
No.
Does he still appear to be in distress?
Yes.
Does it look like his heart respirations are elevated? Or that his respirations are elevated?
Not so much elevated, but labored.
Maybe. All right. And it appears she left the room by 4:44:23, correct?
Yes.
Did you see her do an assessment of Mr. Dempsey?
No.
Did you see her take vital signs of Mr. Dempsey?
No.
Did you see her do anything other than do a med pass and reposition him?
No.
And turn off the call light, correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you believe that that interaction with Mr. Dempsey complied with the standard of care?
No.
And ma'am, you're a supervisor at SAVA, correct?
Yes.
You supervise nurses, right?
Yes.
All right. If you witnessed this nurse, had you seen this as it was happening, would you have written her up?
Yes.
How does it make you feel to watch this, ma'am?
Sick.
Okay. Who just came into the room,
That's
ma'am?
me.
Okay. So, you recall
It
testifying...
looks like me.
I'm pretty sure it is. You came into the room at 6:23:10, correct, ma'am?
Yes.
All right. And contrary to the way you testified previously, there's no one doing CPR, is there?
No.
All right. If you recall, what you testified to previously was that you started CPR and you kept going until the EMTs arrived. Do you recall testifying to that?
Yes.
All right. Man, was there something funny that was happening at 6:30:41 on February 27th, 2014 in the middle of
I have no
this attempt
clue,
to
sir.
resuscitate Mr. Dempsey?
I have no clue. I can't even remember all that, as you can see.
Do you see any sense of urgency on the part of any of the medical providers here, ma'am? Including yourself?
I think I was doing pretty good considering I didn't have anything to work with.
Okay. Well, when you testified earlier that you walked in and started giving CPR from the moment you got there until the EMT showed up, that really wasn't the truth, was it?
Sir, that was an honest mistake because I was just basing everything on what I normally do.
Okay. That's not what you said when I asked you the question earlier, was it?
No.
All right. Earlier you testified that you remembered walking in and seeing a nurse on one side of the bed and a CNA on the opposite side of the bed. You remember testifying to that?
Yes.
Crash cart there in the room. They were
Yes.
providing CPR, correct?
Yes.
You went over there and you took over so that one nurse could go call EMS, and you gave CPR from the moment they left until the EMT showed up. Remember that?
Yes.
All right. But watching this video, we don't see that happen at all, do we, ma'am?
No.
All right.
Again, it was an honest mistake. That's what I generally do.
Tell me what the environment should be like.
It should be bustling with people.
I'm sorry?
Bustling with people.
All right.
Busy.
That's right. Do you believe that Mr. Dempsey and his family deserve better than this, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. Is it appropriate for you to have stopped giving CPR at this time, ma'am?
If the thing is not working,
Well, shouldn't you be doing chest compressions right now, ma'am?
yes.
Okay.
When you first put makeup on, it's great. And 5 minutes later, your starts will catch. But with your cover, it's perfect. I am right here.
Any reason to stop after 6 compressions there, ma'am?
Celebrities have is perfect lighting.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Could be captured.
All right. My question is that the way a code is supposed to work?
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. So that was the videotape deposition of Wanda Knuckles, who was the nursing supervisor for James Dempsey at this nursing home, the Northeastern Atlanta Health and Rehab Facility. And this is a case that the family brought against that nursing home for negligence. That case has settled. And as part of the settlement, that video deposition had been sealed. And over the years since that case has settled, there has been some argument about whether or not that video dep should remain sealed. And it just recently became unsealed, and it's something that we wanted to cover here on the network, especially since our own Rachel Stockman was involved in finding that video back at the time that it first became public. We have on the phone Mark Eisenberg, and I want to talk to you, Mark, about some different aspects of that videotape. First of all, I do have to point out that that was really, in my opinion, very good lawyering on the part of the attorney for the family, sort of setting up Ms. Knuckles as to what she did in this situation and going step by step as to what she did, and then showing a video that showed that everything that she said she would have done was not something that she actually did in this case. What did you think of that?
Frankly, I would have saved that for time of trial. I think that would have been better sprung on the defense at that time, because strategically the case begins to fall apart from the plaintiff's perspective, if you will, by virtue of the introduction of that evidence at time of deposition. And if you'll give me a moment, I'll explain.
Sure.
Oftentimes, to preserve judicial resources, if a court perceives that a particular issue in a case, and in a case like this, you're talking about liability, causation, or damages. Those are the 3 issues. But if a court perceives that one of those issues can be resolved by way of admission, which in this case, it would behoove the defense to admit liability, because the real issue in this case is not the rendition of care or treatment, but rather medical causation. In other words, we don't know if this person had received the resuscitation efforts that the standard of care required, would have or could have been revived. And I think that's the strongest argument that a defendant could make. So if a defendant says, you know something, we botched the care of this individual by not heeding to the standard and providing the resuscitatory efforts until paramedics arrive, the judge is going to look at that and say, okay, well, we don't have to then fight about whether or not the standard of care was met or breached. We can move right into whether or not that caused damage, i.e. caused the death. Most courts are going to say under those circumstances, I'm not going to waste judicial resources and have witnesses come in to testify on standard of care and have this nurse come in and testify if the defense has already said they'll stipulate the liability.
Right,
then it turns around and becomes a defense case.
But Mark, don't you think don't you think that there would be a concern that the videotape would no longer be a surprise if you save that videotape for trial?
No, here's the thing.
And I just don't want to go too far down this road, but let's just respond to that question and then we'll move on to the next issue. Go ahead.
But by introducing that tape at the time of deposition, the plaintiff side has now alerted the defense side that overcoming the standard of care issues is going to be impossible, and some of the inflammatory effect of this video is going to make it impossible for a juror to look at this and be impartial. So as a defense lawyer, you want to get rid of this. The mistake that the plaintiff made was offering this at deposition, because now the defense is going to offer to stipulate to liability. And the judge is going to say, they're stipulating the liability. I'm not going to allow all these witnesses to come in and testify to this stuff. It's not relevant anymore.
I hear your argument. I think in this case, I don't think that's exactly how it went down. But what we do know is that this case ultimately settled. It ultimately resolved in large part, most likely, because of the existence of that nanny cam. Now, according to the reports in this case, it appears as though the family set up the nanny cam in order to videotape what was going on in that room. And because they did, they had that evidence. I want to speak to that issue. What are your thoughts on this idea of setting up nanny cams, and what are the legal concerns and legal dangers of doing so depending on where you live?
Well, many states have statutes with reference to the recording of telephone conversations such that the person being recorded has the right to say, I don't want that released. And if it is released, then criminal action and civil actions can be taken. But there's nothing out there that I'm aware of in any jurisdiction that would preclude a family member from placing a nanny cam, GoPro or otherwise, in the room of a family member, be it at an assisted living facility, skilled nursing facility, or hospital. And while I think it was effective, I also believe that something must have caused them to do that. There must have been some preceding neglect, whether it be bed sores, failure to maintain proper saturation rates, which is often a consequence of oxygen tanks being allowed to expire and not being immediately replenished. There's lots of reasons for someone to do this, but it is not usual behavior in the absence of some form of precursor.
Well, and we're sort of seeing it more and more, which is why I definitely wanted to follow up on that point. So there's wiretapping laws in most states, and in the majority of states, as long as one party consents to a conversation being recorded, it is okay. Now, those wiretapping laws apply not only to telephone calls, but also to videotapes, because in videotapes you are also getting the voices on the videotape. So I want to, for those of you at home who are watching this who are saying what a great idea to set up a nanny cam, you do have to be careful and check the laws in the states that you're in. My last count, there are 11 states that have two-party consents, and that means that both parties have to consent to their conversation being recorded, whether that's by video or by just a phone recording, in order for that to be legal. So before you go setting up nanny cams, whoever, all those people out there watching, you want to be sure that in your state you're not actually breaking the law by doing so. I do think, and Mark, I want to talk to you about this, especially because of the civil rights work you do. Don't you think that we're moving towards having everything that we do, for whether it's a police officer, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a nursing home administrator, having everything we do being on video, and perhaps that is actually a benefit to both sides?
Well, you know, the expectation of privacy that we once enjoyed in the past, in light of modern technology, doesn't really exist as it once did. Moreover, police and other crime-fighting agencies are using cameras very much the way Europe learned to do many years ago, to have more eyes out on the street in hopes of catching perpetrators and otherwise preventing crime, because the citizenry knows that their every move is being watched. You know, this is, in some respects, what Orwell predicted in his book 1984. And I can't say if it's a good thing or bad thing. It definitely forces people to be more forthright and honest. In the case of police officers wearing body cams, provided that they properly activate them when they should, you know, it provides evidence that really remains unrefuted as to what happened in particular instances.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's a good thing or bad.
It certainly, in theory, could lead to better interactions on all parts. If police officers, if nursing home people know that every action that they take is being videotaped, it may in fact improve behavior and ensure that situations like what we just saw on that very upsetting tape don't happen. I do want to point out that since that particular tape was made, that nursing home has undergone new leadership, and in May of 2017 they were found to be completely deficiency-free. So it may be that situations like this one, where you see things on videotape, that it is so much more powerful than just hearing things, and perhaps there were people that were written up, and changes were in fact made at that nursing home. It reminds me of the tape that we had seen once of one of the football players punching his girlfriend in the elevator. And you can hear stories about these things happen, but the impact of actually seeing it with our own eyes and hearing it with our own ears is sometimes more likely to lead to change. Do you find that in your cases as well, Mark?
I do, and certainly in the context of addressing police interaction with citizenry, video is often helpful. Sometimes very early on you see the video and you realize, hey, there's nothing there, and your own client has fabricated a story unaware that the matter had been recorded, whether it's on a dash cam or a body cam or otherwise. But I've dealt with privacy cases in hospitals where people didn't think there were cameras. They turned out to be present and quite helpful. Other times what was caught on video proved quite damning to the hospitals. A couple cases I can think of in which I was representing a hospital, and there were claims of invasion of privacy because of the very existence of cameras in the emergency department where rape victims were taken, and the cameras were placed specifically to protect the victim in case the perpetrator came into the hospital and sought to attack them again. So it's a double-edged sword, and I don't think we're going to see any backing away from it. If anything, I think we're seeing an increase in the number of cameras and their use.
Yeah, one of our, I want to reach out to you, Mark, with some of the questions from some of our chat room. Bria Babe had asked, what about nanny cams in rooms with more than one patient? And I think that goes to your comments about privacy. And one of the reasons that we have to be careful, if one patient's family sets up a nanny cam and that's taking in the activities of another patient who doesn't want to be recorded, that certainly could impinge upon that person's privacy rights and their constitutional rights. What do you think about that particular issue?
Well, if it came to the attention of the other patient or that patient's family, they might have a cause of action for invasion of privacy with reference to that person, any care and treatment they receive, and any conversations that may have been had that are otherwise protected by the physician-patient privilege, or more personal in nature between the patient and their family, some of which may be extremely personal and relate to issues of DNRs or do not resuscitates and living wills and things like that.
Yeah, we have
it's a problem.
And it certainly is a problem, and it certainly opens up the door. You know, if you're going to start, if I actually think there's an argument to be made that the nursing home should be the one to have the cameras there, and for everyone to know, both of the families and the patients and the administrators and the nurses, so that everyone's aware, because something that we don't often talk about is oftentimes there can be abusive patients as well, and no one should have to be the victim of that type of behavior. And so if there are videotape and there are cameras available, then everyone knows it. Everyone knows that those things exist. Everyone knows that there are certain areas, perhaps the bathroom or whatever, or certain, when you close the curtain, there can be agreements, but part of the decision can be that everyone knows, just as when police are wearing body cams, everyone can see them. It's something that can protect perhaps both sides of these types of relationships.
Yeah, it becomes a little harder in the nursing home context because incidents are not regularly reported, because those that are victimized are often infirm or unable to complain either physically or vocally about what may have happened and may not even be aware of it. So you get down to an issue of retention. How long should a recording from a nursing home be retained?
Well,
and some of that, for instance, with the development of bed sores and the failure to properly position patients, that develops over time.
well, that's
If you don't have 30, 45 days of tape, you got a problem.
Well, that's right, and that's another argument for having it there. You know, wrongful convictions brought up a really good point, and that is in that particular nanny cam, we don't know whether or not the nursing home gave approval to set up that nanny cam, and you know, I'm certain that that would have caused some issues with regards to its admission at trial. We know that case resolved, and I know, Mark, that
it had to resolve that case from a standard of care perspective was horrific, but I believe it probably defensible from a medical causation standpoint. But if the defense was unwilling to concede liability or the plaintiff convinced the judge to present his whole case, that case had to settle.
Yeah, it's.
But we're talking about in his late 80s, early 90s if he served in World War II.
Right. So to your point, Mark, and listen, it's a good argument. If you were defending that case, you would have admitted liability, hoped that the judge would keep that entire videotape out of the case, and simply argued that the man did not die as the result of any alleged negligence.
Well, what I would have done is move to bifurcate the case, try it specifically on medical causation, and then if I lost on medical causation, have a separate trial on damages. I wouldn't want the damage aspect to come in during the medical causation standpoint because that's going to garner favor with the jury. I would want to stick with the science. In other words, number one, could he have been resuscitated? If he could have been resuscitated, how long and in what condition would he have survived? In other words, would he have been brain dead because it would have taken so long to resuscitate him? What would his quality of life been? What would his life expectancy have been?
Yeah,
and beat up on all of those issues.
Listen, there's a lot. It all depends on a lot of motions being granted, but certainly that strategy would have been a good one. It appears as though this case resolved, and Sherry pointed out in the chat rooms that maybe that's what the family wanted from the very get-go. You know, I often underscore here at Law and Crime Network the emotional impact of these cases on the parties and on the families, and sometimes a settlement in a case like this one is the best possible thing. We are back in the Adam Matos courtroom. The defendant is coming back to the chair, so something is going on. I'm going to bring you straight there. Mark, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
You're welcome, Heather. Be well.